that's not actually her only role or responsibilities within the firm. So really talking through what does, maybe you are starting in one place within the business, and then do you have a desire to, we'll say, move up the ladder, if that fits and is relevant to your business, or really what is the plan for the spouse?
So is this podcast, this episode, also kind of your growth path? Like, are you going to let listeners in on what your goal is? Or is that too depressing?
I don't know. I don't want to scare anybody, but I think we're open enough. We're good enough friends with our team. I always say I'm always trying to exit, right? Like, how do I not work at all anywhere? How do I become independently wealthy and independent? But yeah, no, that's my growth path.
Yeah, it would be great if you became independently wealthy. By the way, I would support that fully.
I think that's my only way out, right? That's it.
Death or independently wealthy. Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
So with Growth Path, this is a lot of what we do at the office and for clients. So growth, looking at different mechanisms to look at growth. Part of it is financial growth as well, right? So I guess talking into the finances, is it now appropriate to kind of touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And in hopefully the need for bringing on this person is part of the growth path of the business. And it's, things are moving up and to the right, and, revenue is growing, business is growing. It's taking more need away from the founder or founders, and they need trusted support. So that's probably what's led to the beginning of this conversation. So as that growth plan continues, the financial picture, you're obviously trading one salary for potentially another. And maybe it is more or less than what they were making at the other. Maybe it's more because they stayed at home and did not have an income outside of the home. But maybe it's less because overall, the total compensation package at their previous employment was a certain salary plus benefits plus certain other perks that maybe don't exist in the business. And so I know that was one of the big deciding factors, and probably delayed our decision for a year or two, was just benefits like insurance and things like that. So as a young family, we place value on that health insurance, and we wanted to make sure that we had a plan in place. So that's another consideration that I think is very important before you pull the trigger, hire them, and they give notice at their previous employment.
Yeah. And then maybe if we have some listeners who are not in the accounting space, what are some of the benefits financially for the business of hiring the spouse?
There are benefits. You have to weigh benefits and like pros and cons of both sides. So benefits of hiring the spouse is obviously continuing to grow the net worth of the owner. And so if you're not paying wages outside of the family, those wages then stay inside the family. Sometimes it's just easier to pay the wages outside the family though. So paying the wages, increasing the family net worth. We're in Texas where it's community law state. So 50% of what's yours is 50% mine, vice versa. So, a lot of times we'll see owners start putting family members on payroll for the work that they're doing in the business. And really, maybe they're just maximizing retirement benefits that they have in place. And so maybe that's just the step one, because the extra income that would come along with like W-2 wages aren't really that big of a benefit because they factored in the payroll taxes and things like that. And so they're trying to maximize as much benefit as they can from a retirement perspective, but minimize payroll taxes. And it's really finding that balance for what that person is doing in the business. Now that works when it's a couple, when it's spouses. When it is family members, that's not the case. So if you hire your parent or sibling or relative, that is not the case there. And so you have to pay something that's a little bit more equitable, more market value for that person. And if that person were to leave, you're going to be in a much better spot because you're used to paying market. So whenever you bring in that other option that existed before you hired them, then you're kind of back to a reasonable budget because you're already paying that person a fair total compensation package. So,
yeah. So I think what I hear you saying is really the financial benefit or the tax benefit of hiring your spouse is probably the last and the least consideration of actually hiring your spouse, that where there's a need that needs to be filled by a person.
Correct. We'll have some people, as part of tax planning, their spouse does something, it isn't an integral role in the business, and they're on payroll and they're maximizing. But once that need kind of really transfers to, hey, I'm going to need you to show up tomorrow at 8:30 and you can't leave until 5.
And every day thereafter.
Yeah, that's probably a little bit different of a conversation of a need. And it's definitely not a conversation that's happening just because of like tax planning and business planning. So, but yeah, that definitely the growth, the financial growth, can you support that decision? Is the business there maturity wise to support that decision? Yeah.
And so I think moving on to our last consideration would be just talking about having your spouse, if they're showing up at 8:30 and staying till 5 Monday through Friday. Is that sustainable long term? So is your spouse the long-term solution for that need that you're trying to fill?
I think that you have to be realistic, and everybody hopefully loves that person that they do life with, and hopefully they like them too, enough to want to spend time with them that much time. But you have to be realistic. So what are the traits of your spouse? Are those traits going to make life at the office more difficult? Is your spouse, are they not a good listener? Or do they not follow through? Do they show up late? And I've just described myself on purpose. So
just, make that real clear. You didn't describe me. You were describing yourself in those.
And so when you decide to hire me and come on board to this,
I would fire you. You would be fired.
I would apply for unemployment day one. So, so all those traits that your spouse uniquely brings to your relationship, how is that going to impact the business? And you have to do that at arm's length. Evaluate them just like any other candidate. I know that in the season of hiring that we do, you do social profiling and kind of look at other aspects of people's lives and try to get to learn a little bit about them during the interview process and ask questions and just see how they're going to be as a person, because technical skill only goes so far, especially with our team. You have to be fun to be around. You have to be able to communicate really well, or it may not be a long relationship. So I think those are the things that you have a unique and intimate perspective of your spouse, because you know them probably better than others. And you have to be honest in, is it a good fit? Or is it a good fit, or is it an easy fit? And if it's just an easy fit, that is probably not appropriate with moving forward. And so I think you owe it to yourself, your business, and your spouse, maybe to not hire your spouse at the end of the day.
Yeah. And so really looking at that and just revisiting the points that we made earlier about your spouse can't necessarily be your backup. So if you're hiring your spouse, they can't necessarily be the person that is your fill-in or your other half, because then when you do have family emergencies, vacations, things like that, you can't both be out together? And then the other thing, does it make sense to set a term limit as far as the experiment? So you're deciding that, yes, we think this is the appropriate option. This is the best option, is to hire my spouse. And then do you set a trial like you would do maybe for any other team member of the 90 days to revisit? How is this going? Is this working? Or maybe since it's your spouse, you give it a little bit longer. Maybe you give it 6 months or a year, but maybe you set a time limit. Or if they are filling a need temporarily because they are easy right then, but they're not sustainable long term, to definitely set a time limit, like by this such and such date, we need to have somebody who is long term in place.
I think if you deviate from what you would do for other new team members, there has to be a good reason for that. So yeah. I think to make it easier on the business owner, on the rest of the team, I would stick to what you would do for other team members. So much like you have a 90-day probationary period across the board for all new team members, do the same for your spouse. Do one-on-ones, do weekly check-ins, do formal reviews, however many times a year. Follow that same cadence that you do with other team members. And because ultimately there's more than just one important thing in this equation in the business. The other important thing is the relationship and the family that is behind the business. So I think you owe it to that relationship to be candid enough and have things on the calendar to where it forces those conversations to be addressed. And, there's books out there where, it encourages you, it tells you stories about being candid and honest and open and having good communication, because if you keep not addressing it, just brushing it off, it's going to bubble up into a much bigger problem.
Yeah. Is it Andy Stanley that says to be unclear is to be unkind? And ever since I have heard that, I kind of live by that now. So it was easy to brush it off or let it go or not say something or do it in a passive aggressive way. But have found I'm wiser now and know better to really just speak clearly of what's going on. I think you set out some homework for us to do. So we'll probably need to wrap this episode up because I would say that I have not had a formal review for my job, and I have been here more than 8 years now. And if we're going back to the name of our podcast, Who's Really the Boss, does that mean I get to give you a formal review, which also has not happened, even though we do it for all of our other team members?
Whatever.
Are you nervous?
Whatever.
Are you nervous? Does it make you nervous?
Yeah, do I have to do the 3-3-1 and fill that out like on growth plan and what I think I'm?
Oh, I think we're going straight scorecard for you, buddy.
Oh, I'm probably going to get put on a growth plan and then get off the bus really quick here. So this may be my last podcast. It was fun. So
we'll tell the listeners any last words since this might be your last one.
No, I think in all honesty, learn from our mistakes, learn from what we may not be doing well, what we're trying to improve upon. Be candid, and candor goes a long way in any relationship. There are resources out there. There are great leaders like Andy Stanley that can encourage you along the way. Find other people that are also in your same situation. Make sure that you're kind of working off of one another and you've got resources that you're following up with. But in kind of leaving you today, just thinking about those top 3 that we've talked about. So the effects on other relationships, the family effects on the family, or home, whatever you want to say. Maybe you don't have a family at home. The growth path for that spouse and the growth path for the business, making sure that it is the right financial decision and that it can be supported. And then finally, what's sustainable long-term. And I think if you go into it with those 3 things in mind, you're going to be ready for our next conversation.